But with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Sarah Kerr. She is currently, Sarah, you're now the Executive Director of Schoolbox again, is that right?
Again, yeah.
Again, you got out of it, but now you're back in. So the amazing, amazing Nicaraguan and Almont-based charity Schoolbox is what she calls home. She's also a HUMM columnist, which I'm terrifically happy about. And she's just a general fantastic person. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you to have your discussion with Rosemary. And thank you all for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much for organizing this, Chris and Robin. And for agreeing to be our star tonight, Rosemary. This is so fun. So I'm just gonna kind of jump right in, and I got Rosemary's brief bio off her website, and it says, your paintings explore the rich character of familiar objects. You respond to the contemporary cool aesthetic with a focus on what is warm, personal, and evokes a story. A milk carton strapped to an old bicycle, espresso on a messy countertop. Your compositions honor a contemplative approach to everyday life and a celebration of lives deeply lived. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And it says your paintings are featured in collections from California to Massachusetts, in the UK and in Europe, but you live here in Almont with author Jacob Berkowitz. So I just wanted to start out tonight, Rosemary, if you could dig into your bio a little bit. I was really curious about what is your contemplative practice? Was it part of your rhythm of life growing up, or was that something that you found as an adult? I'm just very curious.
Well, for starters, hello, everybody. This is very fun for me. Part of the reason why it's very fun for me is because writers are my people, and I think a lot of you are writers. And maybe writers might be more my people than visual artists, which is sort of a funny thing. But I think the contemplative part, I mean, all artists to a certain extent would have sort of a contemplative thing probably going on in them in some regards. But yeah, and I just want to say this is a little bit, we're referencing the Liz Gilbert, a writer who I really enjoy, who's given a lot of folks encouragement around creativity and has a really interesting podcast on the subject of creativity. So, yeah, and these are the subjects that are really that I've built my life around. And so again, super excited to have this conversation. Yeah, and I think around the contemplative thing, I think it's funny because I have my public bio of, here's Rosemary the painter. And then, I was looking at Sarah's questions and I was like, oh, like, I really need to kind of explain who I am separate from that. Here's the person who does the paintings, because we're having a conversation about creativity. And for me, creativity is like inseparable from sort of like a whole personal journey. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my growing up situation, which was the part that where my heart was cold was really growing up in Toronto, and the part where my heart was warm was being on an island in Point of Barrel which Sarah's actually familiar with that part of the world. But when I spent my summers at Point of Barrel growing up with really we had no electricity, and we had, for a kid to spend 2.5 months picking at the lichen or lying on the dock. That was a really huge part of my contemplative. I wouldn't have had any words of it really for it until I was well into my 30s, really. So, I think that I did a lot of my parents really encouraged painting and artistic pursuits, but they really not as a profession. I mean, professionally, I think I was, the plan was that I would go to Queen's and then I would get married, and then it wasn't their problem anymore. But if I was going to Queen's, I was not going to go into the art building, which like in retrospect was completely messed. I painted throughout adolescence. I painted all the time, and then went and did an academic degree, which I can understand why parents might encourage their kids to do that. And at the same time, I was painting on the sly all the time. So, so in terms of trying to sort of like contemplative practice, painting was my contemplative, like when I was, so I have one person who's here, who's Kath, who knew me when I was trying to be a high school teacher, which was 22. Hold on a second, I'm getting dry mouth. And yeah, I was always like coming home for me was really like painting. Like that was like, oh, phew, now I can really be myself, you know?
Your safe space. Wow. Okay, that's incredible. And it kind of leads, yeah. So, I mean, Elizabeth Gilbert, thanks for introducing that. I think, Chris, we had a few slides for those of us who are visual and want to kind of follow along in that way. We could maybe skip to the one with her book cover. But so she really talks about this idea of creative living, right? And so I think that your intro is so helpful in that way of saying, like, me as a painter or me as a writer is part of who I am. It's not this separate thing.
Yeah, and I think that it's really, for me, it's really interesting. Like when I think about sort of, I had decided I really wanted to have a meaningful, like I found my parents' life sorry, I'm getting really thirsty. I found my parents' life really not interesting. Like I felt like there was this dutiful, you go to work and you suffer through life. And I really felt like, oh, like I really want to be excited about going to work, And
you're a millennial before your time.
well, I was really, but I was also really disoriented. And I really didn't have very good life skills for figuring out creativity. But when I say I can't separate it, like, being a parent, having a sane marriage, having a sane life, these things all were, and being a painter, being a creative person, this was all one package for me. So I really had to sort of parse things out,
Mm-hmm. I think that's amazing. So the first question that I'm kind of getting to, so Gilbert says that when courage dies, creativity dies with it. And I think what you're explaining is like, to be a painter really took a lot of courage from the home that you grew up in. And so she lists, I have it open here, it's 3 pages of fears that she just writes out all the things she can think of. She's like, well, you can't be, a whatever insert writer or painter or whatever creative thing that you really want to be, because you're afraid you have no talent. You're afraid that there's no market for your creativity. You're afraid somebody else already did it better, or that somebody will steal your ideas, or that, your best work is behind you. And she goes on and on and on listing all these fears. So I'm just kind of curious of, was that really the initial fear that you had to overcome, or what other internal narratives do you have to be courageous to overcome in order to create?
Well, I think it's for a lot of people, creativity, it's like their challenge is around showing up. And for me, my challenge was making the rest of my life happen. So I'm really, really good at showing up. I'm in the studio like every morning. There's zero effort for me on that front. And so in terms of like courage and fear, I think that like when I read these questions, and I'm like, oh, courage and fear to me are kind of one unit. And all our conventional wisdom about being a good person, like, be productive. This is what success looks like. Like all our narratives are kind of toxic, like they're really not useful. And so yeah, like kind of like so in terms of courage, parsing courage in the studio and going public. So to me, those are two really different flavors, I don't. So for those of you who are really trying to get going in your writing, and some of you, or whatever your creative projects are, like kind of discerning, is it, do I have feelings of like reticence around getting going, or is it actually about the going public part? So I had beyond scads of courage in terms of work, like it wasn't even courage, it was just like, this is,
You had to do it. Yeah, you just have to show up and paint. Yeah,
totally, I paint to stay sane.
Yeah.
Then there's the going public part, and that's
and bearing your soul to your community, right? And Robin, we've talked about this too, of almost it's easier to introduce your work to people who maybe don't even know you before you do it to people who are close in your community, right?
Yeah, well, that's a really, yeah. So I think people's challenges are really different. Like they're, yeah, for people who have trouble getting going, like for me, I have trouble getting going on exercise, let's say, but my bigger desire is to be healthy. So it's like, okay, I don't want to exercise. 10 years later, I still don't want to exercise. I want to paint, but but the courage around presenting your work. Something that I really encourage my students to think about is like, there's only 3 reactions to your work. Like so like the template's already there. There's the people who are going to love what you wrote. There's the people who will have no reaction, and there's the people who hate it. So like, you already know that. And then it's a numbers game, right? Like, it's like, you put it in front of like 5 people or 500 people, you're going to deal with those 3 reactions.
Oh, that's so interesting. So you kind of rationalize it. When did you get to that stage? Like, were you ever afraid?
Well, sorry, what was the last bit, Sarah?
I guess, like, were you ever afraid? Because you seem so settled in like,
oh no, like I'm just, no, like it's kind of like, when you do enough art shows out in the rain, and it's like, why would you go back to painting the next week, right? Like, it's just like, am I an idiot? Like, why would it's like, I'm spent, So I just feel like, and I think that when you're doing something tentatively and you haven't done it before, you haven't put it in front of people, it's going to be painful. Like, people might go, I love it. And then you go, that's not good enough. Like, I remember one time we were sitting on the porch, and Jake said to me, what do you want? Like a parade down the street? And I'm like, no, that wouldn't be enough. Nothing's enough, So knowing that, knowing what you want to hear, and knowing that it's kind of garbage, right? Like, it's just stuff, right? It's like, I want to be the popular person at the party. It's just garbage. So like, you can do it. So do it so much that you don't care, so.
That's great. Yeah. So then the courage and the fear, she ties together. And in Big Magic, Gilbert says, fear and creativity share a womb. They were born at the same time, and they share some vital organs. I've noticed when people try to kill off their fear, they end up inadvertently murdering their creativity in the process. I thought, and then she provides this whole analogy of inviting fear onto every road trip. So every book she goes to write, she's like, okay, I've got creativity and inspiration, and I'm showing up, and okay, fear, you can get into the back, but you're not driving. And I just kind of thought that was so interesting. Have you consciously being aware of the fear in your process. And do you have a similar analogy to what she talks about?
Well, I really encourage, I read a lot on these subjects. There's a book called Art and Fear,
Okay.
which is old. But I often, not that, like, who cares if it's old, right? It's like, it could be 500 years old. But there's I think it's a professor runs an experiment. There's the quality group and the quantity group. And the quality group have to do one perfect painting, and the quantity group just have to produce a lot of work, like 10 works.
Oh.
Then they take there's no names on any of this. They throw all this work and mix it up, throw it in front of a jury, and the jury consistently picks the quantity work. So it's kind of the opposite of everything that we're taught in terms of like work hard and all that stuff. It's like getting, producing a lot of stuff. Eventually you just become, your ego is less involved in it's good, it's bad. I'm not saying that it's still brutal for me to let go of a painting. Like for me to go, this is just not working out, and it doesn't matter how much work I've put into this. It's really painful. It's still painful, but I gradually go, okay, this is what creativity is. Like, why do I think I'm not going to fall? Of course I'm going to fall, and so we have this, when I say that a lot of conventional wisdom is not supportive of us, it's like, we want to try something and be rock stars without doing anything inelegant, and that's like, we all know, like, it's not happening, so.
I love that. And so this leads perfectly into the next question, because she talks about how, this whole idea of genius, the language around it was I can't remember what the original Roman word was, but it basically was like, the idea of genius was like, you had kind of like spirits accompanying you. So it was like this third party thing. And then in the English, we've switched it to genius as like, I am, the personal, like, I am a genius. Like, it comes from me, and how that's kind of messed with the whole creativity process. And I thought that was just so, I've been thinking about it a lot. And she says, I believe that creativity is a force of enchantment, not entirely human in its origins. She talks about ideas swirling around us, just looking for a human host willing to partner. And she gave the example of Ruth Stone. Does anybody know the poet Ruth Stone?
I wasn't familiar with her, but anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so anyway, I might just take a minute and read to the story about the tiger's tail, because I just thought it was, I don't know, it really got something going in me. So she said, I met Stone when she was nearly 90 years old, and she regaled me with stories of her extraordinary creative process. She told me that when she was just a child growing up on a farm in rural Virginia, she would be out working in the fields when she would sometimes hear a poem coming towards her, hear it rushing across the landscape at her like a galloping horse. Whenever this happened, she knew exactly what she had to do next. She would run like hell towards the house, trying to stay ahead of the poem, hoping to get a piece of paper and a pencil fast enough to catch it. And that way, when the poem reached her and passed through her, she would be able to grab it and take dictation, letting the words pour forth onto the page. Sometimes, however, she was too slow and she couldn't get to the paper and pencil in time. At those instances, she could feel the poem rushing right through her body and out the other side. It would be in her for a moment, seeking a response, and then it would be gone before she could grasp it, galloping away across the earth, as she said, searching for another poet. But sometimes, and this is the wildest part, she would nearly miss the poem, but not quite. She would just barely catch it, she explained, by the tail, like grabbing a tiger. Then she would almost physically pull the poem back into her with one hand, even as she was taking dictation with the other. In these instances, the poem would appear on the page from the last word to the first, backwards, but otherwise intact. And I just wonder, when you talk about paintings that got away, like, have you ever had, anyway, I'm off.
Well, my paintings that got away are more painful than that.
Okay. It's not like I missed the galloping horse.
Well, maybe I've put 6 months into them, right?
Okay.
And they've gotten worse. It's not like any of our formulas about if I work hard, it'll get better. It's like, no, you've actually, it's worse than it was like, at whatever 2 hours into it. So, yeah, I think it's, when I read that, I thought it was interesting. I mean, the first thing I thought of was, our dreams. So, I don't know how many of you actually write down your dreams, and dreams have kind of become a big part of our household in the last couple of years. And we did a dream course with a couple of people who are joining us here. So writing down your dreams is annoying. And if you don't do it right away, you're like, for me, it's not happening. I don't.
Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah. And so I guess in terms of ideas, it was funny because one of the people who's with us, I was having a chat with Randy today, and he was talking about one of my paintings that he just bought, and he was talking about how he responded to it. And I was saying, well, my paintings are kind of done when I start a painting. It is formed. The flip side of it is that I would really hate to think that I had to be on guard all the time, and that scarcity thing. If I'm not attentive all the time, then I'm going to miss out on these, paintings that are coming down the tubes. I have a painting idea every 5 minutes. It's not so I'm not short of ideas, but I think that a lot of the writing around creativity involves this element of divinity, and whether you're, I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with the artist's way. So Julia Cameron takes the kind of Alcoholics Anonymous approach to creativity, and you're offering yourself up to a higher power, that kind of thing. And I think that it's really interesting in terms of ideas that are floating around and you have to grasp it. There's an element of urgency to that I don't feel comfortable about. And I feel like, oh, well, why is it that I don't? And then I think, well, I'd have to be on guard all the time. And what if you lose good ideas? And I think
like a scarcity, oh, then it's gone and I'll never get it back.
Yeah. And then I have to rush, and that sucks. And I already hate writing down my dreams. And anyway, so, but I do think that the corollary element to me, and a big part of it too, is that when I first saw The Artist's Way, I was like, oh, this is about God. And that's off my shelf. I'm not reading this, right? And then it was really it took me 10 years to get back to it. And then I'm like, okay, so I think that the language around both ends of this, for me, I sort of fit somewhere in the middle. So I think, oh, how do I get these ideas that are coming down the pipe? I don't think that the ideas are outside of me. I think I need to clean my space in order to hear the ideas. So it's exactly the same as you clear out a drawer, you find the thing that you were looking for, you had to get rid of all the other things. And I've gotten rid of so much in my life. I don't say that so much with pride as the fact that this is what I need to focus. Painting is what I want to dedicate, painting well is what I dedicate my life to. And what's the infrastructure it takes to support that? And so silence, for instance, and not trying to be productive all the time creates that blank slate so that you can hear the ideas.
Love it. Yeah, that's great. So the next thing, we kind of touched on this already, but Gilbert talks, the next chapter that she goes to is this idea of permission, giving ourselves permission, and sometimes we feel like that needs to be external. And so she talked about how, similar to you, her parents weren't really creatives, but she actually found inspiration in that, of how they would start a Christmas tree farm, or her parents would like just raise goats or chickens and just make stuff. And she talked about, for most of history, people just made things, and they didn't make, what she says, quote, make such a big freaking deal about it. And so she's like, you don't need anybody's permission to live a creative life, but we're in this capitalist world where you have to have like that degree, or that person giving you the check on the box, or like writing the intro to your book, in order for it to actually have value. I'm just wondering, do you ever feel like, were there points in your life where you felt like you were waiting or needed permission from somebody to create? And then obviously, you've been creating your whole life, so you got over that. I'm curious about that.
So, Sarah, I'm the youngest of 4 children. And so, oh yeah, I needed permission. And I'm a good girl, so then I really need permission. And something I often will tell my students, I'm like, imagine a kid comes to you and he's got like a really scratchy kind of voice, and he says, do you think I'm going to make it big as a musician? And you go, probably not, no. And then you go, yeah, but I'm Neil Young, right? So it's kind of like, if I listen to Neil Young, I don't go, oh, what a beautiful voice. I go, no, he just had chutzpah, right? Like, he was like, this is what I want to do. And I think that
Leonard Cohen and Joni Mitchell, you're kind of like, oh, wow, ballsy. Yeah.
Something that Liz Gilbert says often in her podcast is, we didn't know we needed him. So when the kid with a scratchy voice says, here's me and my guitar, and I'm just gonna or Bob Dylan, like, I'm not a great singer, I'm just like, this is me doing what I feel like doing. Like, we don't know that we need Leonard Cohen until he says, well, actually, I matter, right? And so that's very counterintuitive in a way, to say, like, nobody knows that I exist, but I'm going forward with this, even though.
I love that. We didn't know we needed him. And
Yeah.
if we could live out of that heart space for each other, like, just what kids are going through, this bullying and feeling like they have to be in all these boxes instead of just being themselves,
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of my not helpful ideas about creativity, I had to undo because I wanted to have healthy kids. So it was sort of a parenting question, and like, how am I gonna have a marriage that's like good, not just like surviving, like, and a lot of these things really kind of came together for me, like, almost in one thing. So with the Neil Young analogy, well, how do you be yourself in your marriage? Well, if you have a set of beliefs that, I can either be myself or I can be in this marriage, that's setting up a really difficult situation for yourself, right? And I think that creativity is like almost like your internal marriage. It's like you've got one idea, like, have to be productive all the time, and another idea, like, I need rest, and in fact, my good ideas come to me in the shower. Well, like, I'm going to have to find some peace on this,
Yeah. And so she talks about persistence, and that was one of the values I resonated most with in her book, because she says, I don't know a creative soul who doesn't dream of calm, cool, grass-growing days in which to work without interruption. Somehow, though, nobody ever seems to achieve it. And so I was just thinking about you've been an artist and a teacher and a speaker and a writer and a mom and a wife and a daughter and blah, like all these hats. and I have little kids, and just how did you fit it, how did you fit it in around that, trying to have a healthy marriage, trying to be a good mom, and knowing this is what you had to persist at?
Well, I think kids are, for starters, really awesome for your creativity and for your honesty, because kids require you to be like, they require you to be honest, and with yourself, with them, and so I mean, it's kind of a two-part question in terms of what, as I've alluded to, I really struggled when my kids were little, and I'm like, how am I going to earn a living, and how am I going to stay sane? And so I think for creative parents, like, none of my creative friends had kids, for starters. Like, the people I was friends with before we, like my friends from university, they didn't do it, and I think, like, we need creative parents, and it can be really, if you need that contemplative time, it's really hard. And I can remember saying there were two older parents who I knew who were, one was a potter, one was a painter. The potter said to me, I wish I had just closed the studio for 5 years. And I was like, screw you. Like, I hate you. Like, I just did not want to hear that.
Yeah.
And then the other person said, I would put my kids in daycare sometimes and go have a bath. And I was like, that's insane. I have to produce 50 fabulous paintings and get them sold before the day's done,
Yeah.
And that wasn't helping me. So I really think, I feel excited when I think about people with strong creative leanings who also have kids. And it's a insane situation. And in our situation, we had two of us, like both of us,
creating. Yeah.
Like, you had 5 minutes last week, and I need 5 minutes this week, it was like,
yeah.
Yeah, like, oh my gosh.
They're good. Please keep them away from the door.
No, it was really, really hard. And I think, having a clean house, for starters, is like totally stupid. And like, and I think I feel really strongly about parents doing whatever it takes to stay sane. And for people who stay sane through their creativity, you're just going to get these tiny little bits.
Yeah. So she actually talks about sneaking it in almost like an affair. Like, you have to kind of just like find these little times to see your lover, of like, write it down, or like put 10 minutes down, or, just do it.
It's painful because you feel like this is garbage. Like, I'm producing something that's garbage.
Yeah.
I don't need twice as much time. I need 800 times as much time.
Yeah.
But the good news is that you're going to live to be 150. So,
so you got lots of time. She talks about, sorry to cut you, I just see some chats around her. We've got 5 minutes to wrap up. So one of the last core values she talked about was trust. And I had a couple of parts to this, but I'm just going to jump to, she talked about our egos, and said that, and you talking about this contemplative focus to your work. I thought this would be interesting to know. She talks about our egos can be a wonderful servant, but also a terrible master. So what Buddhists call the hungry ghost. And I felt like it was helpful. She differentiates between our soul and our ego, and says that our egos seek reward, but our soul desires wonder. And I felt like that was really helpful, because I think what you were talking about before, of like presenting your work, and it's never going to be fulfilled, but that your soul needs to do it,
Oh, I big time needed to do it. And we have, I mean, I come from a crazy unhealthy family. I mean, my mom had electroshock therapy. We had suicides, whatever. Anyway, that's a longer thing. But I really felt like, to stay sane, I kind of need to spend all day being really quiet and painting. And like, you know, conventional wisdom would say, well, that's not happening, you know, and it's really been a matter of like me deciding this is more important. I wish when I had met Jake, I wish I had said to him, you know what, come hell or high water, I'm going to paint and I'm going to write. It's not going to matter whether I'm in the gutter. The conversation about when I go and get some well-paying job, it's not a conversation. I will paint myself into the gutter. There's nothing to talk about here.
I was at a wedding recently, and it was a second marriage, so they were older, and they wrote amazing things into their vows, like, you're gonna bring me coffee every morning, and I'm gonna have time carved out to write, and like all those things that you wish when you're, you know, I was 21 and you get married and you're just like in the romance of it. You're like, no, actually, I need to get these things in the contract right now.
Well, I think I treated it as something that was maybe negotiable. And the thing was, is that it actually wasn't negotiable for me. So it's a bit different than someone like, you're going to get me coffee, because it's saying I have no other way to be on this planet.
I can't really function without coffee. I know you.
Well, I mean, like, I just sort of think like, oh, it would have been more peaceful for me if I had said, for whatever reason, I'm just built this way, and I can't.
Who I am.
Yeah, and it's not. I can't be like a healthy person and ignore this part of me. And yeah, that's it. It's pretty countercultural, really.
So countercultural,
Um,
right? Because
yeah,
it's like,
and I just want to say, like, in terms of ego, I a little bit. I didn't mean to. When I was talking about The Artist's Way, and like, I read Eckhart Tolle, for me, this book is like full of notes. Like I've read this book probably 10 times, and I read it and I open it and I'm like, that's challenging. And like, but I really, letting whatever you believe in and whatever your practices are, like, I love monastic practices. Like, I sort of feel like, oh, being really still, you know, being kind of a worldview that's less hierarchical, you know, gratefully taking what's in your bowl, you know, these practices are really meaningful to me. And for people for whom their creative lives are a spiritual calling and they have language around it, like, you know, like channeling, or like, you know, this is what God wants me to do. I envy people who have like faith in a higher power. I just can't get there myself. So I have to frame it in terms of sanity. I have to frame it in terms of like starting with psychotherapy, right? It's just like, okay, I've got all these ideas of how things should be, and this is how things are actually going. Can we fix this? And so that was like deconstructing my whole personality, you know? And for someone who can kind of skip that whole chapter and like believe that there's a God who's organizing everything and there's even a book with the answers in it, like, great, you know, like, I would love that. But I think, yeah, like, I think it's in either case, being still allows whether you want to call it divine or whether you want to call it, this is what I do to stay sane. The stillness part, that for us, that's like laziness, right? Like, we don't, so it's a lot of parsing.
Yeah. Okay, so we're a little bit over time. I'm just going to wrap up a little bit. She talks about this divinity piece, which is really interesting that we kind of right there. So feel free to listen. This is how she wraps up her book. Creativity is sacred and it's not sacred. What we make matters enormously and it doesn't matter at all. We toil alone and we are accompanied by spirits. We are terrified and we are brave. Art is a crushing chore and a wonderful privilege. Only when we are at our most playful can divinity finally get serious with us. Make space for all these paradoxes to be equally true inside your soul, and I promise you can make anything. So please calm down now and get back to work, okay? The treasures that are hidden inside you are hoping you will say yes. So how do you fit that in with your?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of, it's really kind of a semantics discussion, because for me, it's really, yeah, like whether, I think for some people, they're like, oh, soul, what does that mean? I don't know, you know, and they get vexed by it. And that doesn't mean you're not creative. It means it's the wrong language for you, you know? And I think that I wrote down a Somerset Maugham quote that I really, actually, I wrote down two quotes. So one is Somerset Maugham. I write only when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 a.m. sharp. So to me, that's a nice balance between those things.
The showing up. Yeah. And just keep showing up. The persistence. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. But for pleasure, like persistence is such a, I mean, I'm persistent in terms of skill. Like, I feel like that requires persistence because well, I mean, yes and no. I'm just interested. I want to be a better painter. It means I change what I do. There's complications with that, you know, but so that is persistence. The pleasure part of the persistence feels important to me, you know?
That's awesome. Rosemary, thank you so much. We've got some amazing questions coming in the chat. So I just thought maybe we could skip to that. Does that make sense, Chris?
Oh, Chris, you're
probably. Oh, one sec.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Just clarify, which Eckhart Tolle book were you holding up there, Rosemary? Which one did you happen to have?
This is A New Earth, and I have a whole list of, I've read some really good writing books recently. So if anyone wants to drop me an email, I can kind of give them some podcasts I listen to, and it's sort of divided into writing and on the more spiritual end of things, and books that have been really helpful to me.
If you wanted to email those to me, I have everybody's email address. I can just fire it off when I promote the next Winterwords Cafe, for example. And so that, yeah, that'd be great.
So Liz Phillips, she says, Rosemary, you're rearranging my whole world. I now have to turf my psychotherapy practice and start freaking painting again. I learned so much tonight. So I thought that was fantastic.
Okay, good. Her, she's one of those annoying people who is just like fantastic, like the world's best painter, and just does it sometimes when she feels like it. Okay.
And then Janice, I don't have the pleasure of knowing you, but I love your comment. So you said, I'm just wondering, what were we actually talking about when, so you said, I think that everything you're saying is so valid and encouraging. Are you talking about everything, or was there a specific thing? Because you said, that being said, I think it's worth reflecting on not all of our fellow artists of color or other sexuality have this luxury. So Janice, are you there? Did you want to maybe expand on that?
Oh goodness, I don't know that I can properly expand on this, because I'm not a person who experiences these barriers, but I'm learning a lot from other people, and I appreciate the luxury of us, the artistic expression we have, but just maybe opening ourselves up to understanding other people might not have that. That's all.
So was there a point in the conversation, like did something trigger you to think that, or you just think in general?
I think it was just in expressing to our partner that we would want to be able to have these.
Oh, in the whole marriage thing.
Exactly.
I
thought that I am not negating anything that was said. I think it's super valid.
No,
I've learned so much. It was just I work in social housing, and the women and individuals who I work with, it's just, they're not always empowered to be able to set those boundaries around their artistic work. So just
totally.
I just wanted to comment on
No, I
that.
think that's great. And Danielle, you had a great response too. Did you want to add to the conversation?
Oh, yeah, I feel like once we are all allowed to like just drop the thing and do the thing that we love, because some of those things are like computer programming, and that's really cool. I have a lot of friends who are artists of color who one of them went to a panel to the government and pitched the fact that maybe artists could get, you know, the universal basic income because the idea of starving for your art or like living in a gutter isn't something that everyone can manage. And a lot of immigrants, their parents won't let them do that thing that they love because they came here to give them a better life, and they can't imagine their child not eating so that they can make art, right? And so they have this pressure.
It's actually so interesting.
And I'm sure that Rosemary also had that pressure from, I was just saying that we all experience, I think there's not a lot of places where people are encouraged to be creative. My children are, but I feel like that's also a privilege.
For sure. Yeah.
She actually talks about it in her book about how this idea that we should like make a living on our art is putting too much pressure on it. And so she actually talked about how she never put that pressure on her writing to make a living of it. But then it's also interesting, the flip side of that, right? Like, well, why not? You know, I'm just curious.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Why not something of such beauty and value? Why would that not be a source of living? Why would that be a luxury?
Mm-hmm. But I think it goes back to that point where she said, like, for all of history, people just created things, you know, we had to work and we had to create, and it was just like all part of it. I wonder how that plays in.
I think it's really interesting in terms of, I mean, I interact a lot with 20-year-olds, and it's kind of tricky saying to a 20-year-old, oh, do what you love, including my own kids. They find it tricky. I found it tricky because it's, and I think for me, what I really see in the art world is that it's not about talent. It's not about even like in terms of like how desperate are you to do this is the real question to me. And I know kids who are really quite affluent who you go, well, you're very privileged. You could, so externally, materially, they're totally affluent. And yeah, they totally have the option of doing da-da-da-da. But their internal experience is so narrow, they have no feeling of choice. And, you know, it was somebody I was reading, maybe James Hollis, therapist actually, who was talking about how sometimes people from affluent backgrounds, their range is actually narrower because we're looking at, okay, like what are your material options? Well, sometimes people who have very few material options, you know, like can throw their parents' opinions to the wind, like you know. So it's to me, it's almost more relevant or more useful conversation about how badly do you want this.
That's interesting. Like the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs in Canada are Indigenous youth, right? And like my friend Ronald in Nicaragua, he's so industrious and entrepreneurial, and I'm like, what the heck is wrong with me? You know. And then I think it's because we put limits on ourselves of what we're capable of. Whereas when, like, not that you give up your privilege, like you have to be aware of that privilege, if that's a privilege that you, you know, but also being like, oh, we can actually really learn from these friendships of being like, I've got nothing to lose and go for it.
Well, and that's why it was actually pretty important for me to have, for my kids to have experience overseas, is because we think, oh, well, like this is, you know, like to see how other cultures solve problems is really, you know, like, so I think that's huge for me.
That's huge. Yeah. Was there any other, I see lots of amazing comments. Did anybody else have a question before we move on to the next part for Rosemary?
A
Anyway,
lot of
thank you.
people appreciating the evening and thanking Rosemary for her candid thoughts, and Sarah for all your preparations. So yeah, no, that's lovely.
Great question. I just want to say one thing, one expression that I loved: no mud, no lotus. And I also wanted to say that wanted to do a pass around the hat for the HUMM. So I'm not sure how that would happen, but I asked Chris if that was okay. Just in a, if you've enjoyed this evening and you feel like, yeah, that's worth a coffee, thank you for throwing your, any donation at all is really welcome, and no pressure on anyone, but much appreciated.
That's so nice, Rosemary. Thank you. And
Yeah.
also go to Rosemary's website and tell your friends how amazing her art is, because we all love it. As everybody was joining, people were like, "Can we show you all of our Rosemary Leach paintings?" I just loved it.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, especially Chris and Sarah and Robin, for organizing this. It's
Entirely our pleasure.
very meaningful for me.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Rosemary and Chris
Delightful.
and Sarah.
Thanks,
Lovely.
Rosemary.
So